Great. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever in the world you're tuning in from. My name is Brianne Hackman, and I am the Strategy, Policy, and Partnerships Officer at the Ghana Commodity Exchange. I'd like to take an opportunity to welcome you all. I am your moderator for the session. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for taking time out of, I'm sure, your very, very busy schedules to be here. And thank you for joining the AGRF. I'm sure each session has been informative, but I am very biased, and I have to say that this is probably going to be the most interesting one based on my very biased opinion. But today we have an esteemed panel of speakers. They'll be sharing their insights on a very important topic. I would like to hand over to each and every one of them in a second, but before that, I would like to just give a background on the topic. So today we're talking, we will be speaking on building interconnected African markets, a very relevant topic within our commodity trading and trading agenda within Africa today. I would like to hand over to, first of all, Ms. Tuchi Ivowi to introduce herself and to provide maybe just a little bit of information about what she does and her background. Tuchi.
Thank you, Brianne, and good to see you all online. I'm Tuchi Ivowi. I'm the CEO of the Ghana Commodity Exchange. The exchange was established in 2018. And essentially is here to provide a structured market for trading, starting with agricultural commodities. Prior to that, I spent over 15 years with Nestle, mostly in Central and West Africa region. So I worked for many years in the cocoa and in the coffee value chains across the business from end to end. So, you know, good understanding of value chains and really the Ghana Commodity Exchange, the kind of role it can play upstream in helping to provide structured trading for Africa, starting in Ghana. So I think that's a little bit of a background on me.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Ivowi. I think second, we would like to hand over to Mr. Thomas Onyado. Hello, welcome.
Hello, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here for such an important subject for not just our business, but for our people as well. I'm the regional manager and head of trading for West Africa for Talk Commodities. I've been working in commodities for over 15 years now, first at BP in oil and gas industry, and then moved to Louis Dreyfus, where I got my education in agriculture, and now for Talk Commodities, which specializes in exports out of Africa and processed goods. We've got bases all over West Africa. We're expanding into East Africa, and we've got a large presence in Asia. We're a big believer in investing in the people, investing in Africa, and we believe this discussion and groups like this will help, move the agenda forward. So we're very excited to be part of this. We're here to help. Any questions? We're all here to respond and to support this movement.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. Very, very inspiring. On a similar note, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Ziad Hamwi. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Brianne. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Ziad Hamwi. I am executive director in a transport company, so logistics and warehousing within Ghana. But on the side of that, I'm also a founding member, past president, and the current national president of the regional advocacy group, the Borderless Alliance, which promotes regional integration and the free movement of goods and people across West Africa. And we do that by tackling barriers of trade and transportation in collaboration with all the stakeholders concerned. So it's good to be here today to talk about the role of technology and how to make that kind of advocacy even more effective, and how to help accelerate the transformation of Africa and agriculture in the near future. Good to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hamwi. Logistics, definitely an important aspect of our value chains. And last but not least, I would like to hand over to Nabil Msedi to introduce himself and say hello.
Thank you, Brian, and hello, everyone. So my name is Nabil Mseri, and I'm CEO at AgFlow, a collaborative market intelligence platform for agriculture, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, and with the vision of digitalizing agricultural markets, and the mission to lead humanity's transition to a transparent and efficient global food supply chain. And we believe that we are in the right place here at the conference to talk about that. And we also believe that to a large extent, the future of agriculture, the global agriculture, lies in African markets. And we have recently started to expand in Western Africa, in countries such as Senegal, Ghana, Ivory Coast, and hopefully many more soon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nabil, and thank you to all our speakers. It's great to hear that we have a well-esteemed panel. I think this will definitely be an interesting session. We look forward to hearing from you shortly. However, just a quick background on the session. So today we find that African countries are increasingly taking steps towards digitalization of agricultural markets to boost growth, to achieve the goal of food self-sufficiency. And for decades, these African countries have faced several challenges along the value chain, resulting from an accelerated trend of increased consumption of agricultural products, increased production, and all this in line with national policies and efforts. This has led to growing dependence on innovative financing of agricultural value chains. And in this context, promoting agricultural solutions for local and international commodity purchases to supply local agricultural value chains is key to building interconnected African markets. So from the speakers, we hope to take away the importance of the AFCFTA program, information systems, and also clearly documented regulations and commodity exchanges in boosting intra-Africa trade and protecting and monitoring local markets. So before we begin, please note that there'll be a Q&A at the end of the session. So please leave your questions in the chat, and please write in the question who you would like to direct your question to. So we look forward to reading your responses and answering any questions you may have. But without further ado, I think it's a good time to begin the session. In 2021, utilizing ICT and information systems to build interconnected markets has become the dominant paradigm. So I'd first like to throw this question to Thomas. With your experience in commodity trading directly and also international trade flows within the continent, how would you define the importance of information systems in the African trade industry?
Information systems, it basically defines the entire industry. The issue that we have now is that there are no systems. So inevitably what companies like myself end up doing, building our own internal systems. So we have price monitoring, we balance sheets, which we manage as well. So we're looking at crop sizes, we're looking at weather patterns, not just in the US, but clearly in Africa as well. So we're mapping out where we see the price going for commodities. And then we're also monitoring the prices at finals destination for a lot of these products. So whether it be cocoa, whether it be cashew, sesame, we have a live daily internal posting system. So almost like an internal trade market. So we post all the regional prices. Even within country, we have various prices posted every single day, and the corresponding destination prices in Asia, which is one of the, if not the largest destination for most of the exported goods out of Africa. So we've built our own system, and I think that's why AgFlow are developing a fantastic tool, which is going to pretty much standardize what we're doing internally, but for the whole market. Ultimately, the more data, the more information, the better. Yes, many people may think that having an asymmetry of information is great for traders. They know everything and everybody else knows nothing, and they make more money. But ultimately, the more eyes, the more data, the more information means there'll be more faith in the system, in what's being produced out of Africa. It means there'll be more understanding for potential FDI into the region, because you can track the data, you can see what the crop patterns are looking like, and it will start to build up the confidence in Africa as being a large agricultural producer. So we're a big supporter of information systems. Again, it's the crux of what we do, and we want to continue to see the industry move in that direction, having more available information for farmers, for banks, for governments, for end users overseas. And I mean, we're happy to contribute towards that. That's what we're doing currently with AgFlow, and we think this is the good direction for the industry to move in.
Great, no, very important. I think I'd have to agree that definitely the more eyes, the more data, the more information, the more trust is built in African systems. So speaking of AgFlow, I'd like to also ask Nabil this question. Thomas already mentioned the project that you're spearheading in West Africa to promote the prices of various commodities for various agricultural commodity value chain actors. But from your perspective, how important are information systems in the African trade industry?
Sure, thank you, Brian. So first, I would like to remind the initial theme of the conference, which is pathways to recovery and resilient food systems. And I think that, so that's the end. But to achieve such an end, one should start with some necessary preliminary steps, and which is one of them to modernize the African economy and bring more transparency. That could be the first answer in order to eventually reach agricultural modernization over the whole value chain. So to respond to your question, I think it's currently important, and here is why. So as already said by Thomas from Tor Commodities, so we are in a highly fragmented market. That's the case worldwide with ags, but even more in Africa. And that raises challenges such as the fact that market prices are opaque, and the market is subject to abusive arbitrage practices, and whether it is nationally or with international trades. Sometimes markets are opaque to the extent that local players and even nations are not even aware of what's produced nationally and end up importing rather than supporting local economies. Local producers selling nationally, even then, do not necessarily price their product properly, and that finally discourages other potential producers to get into the game. So, and as a result, products are not traded at arm's length. The environment is sadly subject to bad practices such as under-invoicing, smuggling, etc. Transactions are subject to high risk of default and fraud, which has eventually an impact on the financing and investment activities and production activities to unsustainable and sometimes in socially unethical practices. So that all leads us to a landscape that do not encourage finance providers to support our regional economies, first at affordable costs. We see very high interest rates in Africa, and sometimes even not at all. So it's not optimal at all. So we believe that with a proper collaborative trade information system, and by collaborative, I think of the AgFlow model, which is collecting data from the market, processing it and redistributing it to the market, so to the individuals, to the organizations that contributed to it, will unlock vast amounts of foreign and local direct financing, and most importantly, microfinancing for the entire value chain, and actually all player sizes, because all players do not have the opportunities that a Torque trading house has, for example. And that would definitely, we believe, boost local economies and eventually the resilience of the food systems.
Very true indeed, Nabil. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I would also like to hear from Mr. Ziad Hamoui. You have a strong hand in logistics, so it would be great to hear from that side of the value chain. Similar, just to answer the question, so how would you define the importance of information systems in the African trade industry, especially in relation to what you do?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question, and depending on which country you are in, the answer will vary slightly. And that is the effect of the lack of access to reliable information, regional information. The fact of the matter is that as a logistician, it is really difficult to get access to reliable and relevant and up-to-date information that can be used for decision-making, for sales, for production, for market linkages. And whatever information is there, because of the scattered nature of it, will not give you the ability to make adequate policymaking and on a regional scope. So it localizes your industry. And that is very bad for a continent like Africa, with 55 countries, with 1.2 billion people, with $2.5 trillion economy. Imagine, for example, that we have a population that is within the range of countries like India or China. But the difference is that in China, you have one set of laws that are applicable for everyone within that 1.2 billion. And then the same thing for India. Of course, the enforcement and the implementation will differ, but it's one set. When you have 55 countries, you would think that it is natural that these countries will try to standardize, will try to harmonize, will try to integrate their systems together in order to make sure that the resources, the decisions, the information flows all flow seamlessly in a cost-effective way. But that is not the case. And for us as an advocacy, beyond the logistics, access to reliable information prevents the ability to reach out to the decision makers and to help them to make informed decisions about what are the real reasons about the bottlenecks at points of entries along the corridors or at the border crossings. Let me here just talk briefly, for example, about an issue with cross-border trade in West Africa. We know that about 70% of traders and cross-border traders in West Africa are informal. And this leads to a situation where many of the actual trade flows across West Africa are under the radar. And on the other hand, you know that the official figures talk about intra-African trade at around 15.6% or 15.7%, with a ratio of intra-African trade that varies according to the regional economic communities from 2% in the less integrated one to 20% and above in the more integrated one. So there's a huge discrepancy within the African continent between RECs, but all of them share the same issue with regard to the lack of access of information due to the nature. And so as a decision maker or as a policy maker, how can you make the appropriate decision if most of the information, if you don't even know what the volumes of the trade are? And even the ones that you have do not allow you to make that kind of decision. So let me just take a step backward now and talk about the importance of data intelligence. I like that. And for me, data is the key point to enter into access to reliable information, which will also transcend into useful knowledge. And that will help us with decision-making, with sales, with production, with manufacturing, and basically making sure that we come back with a balanced trade across the continent. We no longer want to suffer from the constant external shocks due to the hyper-globalization and the over-lengthy value chains. Every time there is a vessel that gets stuck somewhere in the world, Africa feels it most. And that underscores the fact that we need to build the capacity of the local markets, but also to build this kind of reliable interconnectivity where we can trade among ourselves with the goods which we produce. Don't need to look on the international markets and see the Vietnam rice or the Thai rice. Let's look at, let's try to create a system where we have a dashboard where we can see the Kenyan tea, the Ethiopian coffee, the Ghanaian cocoa, and all of the other maize and rice and all of the other products which we produce locally. And then we try to build a way to interconnect these. The technology and data will help us do that one. Technology, innovation, and renewable energies are the key. And data will be critical in order to extract and to mine all of this information and to use it meaningfully. And finally, enhancing access to local products in nearby markets by creating these market linkages across the continent. You would be surprised you will not be surprised rather to hear that many African countries prefer trading externally because they lack visibility to the markets which lay across the continent. And you remember, Tushi, some time ago, we wanted to find some time to discuss about how we can interconnect the continent and find markets and access, because we talk about interconnectivity, but the trade volumes are not there. And the trade volumes are not there because the markets are not perceived to be there. So how can we link all of that using data? I know I've spoken a lot, but so let us have a more engaging discussion with the Q&A and as it goes. Thank you, Brian. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ziad. Very, very insightful. A lot of knowledge to unpack there. And thank you. And we look forward to drawing upon more insights into intra-Africa trade from your expertise later on. But one factor you mentioned, which I'd like to expand on further, is the topic of the standardization of food commodities to promote the trade of staple food commodities within various African countries. And I'd like to turn over to Tucci. At the moment, Africa is producing more staple food commodities. In Ghana, commodities such as maize and rice are being promoted under the government Planting for Food and Jobs initiative, among other commodities. However, our local commodities are still facing price battles with imported goods. I'd like to throw this question at you, as the commodity exchange plays a great role in helping farmers to develop their own agency by setting prices of commodities. And this is often done through their ability to negotiate prices with buyers via the exchange's e-commerce platform. But in the era where Africa and the exchange are key players in increasingly promoting competitiveness of our local products globally, how could great information on the international markets benefit the price listing of new commodities?
Thank you, Brian. I mean, this is everything we're talking about is about information, and it's kind of the beginning and the end of everything. If we look at some of the challenges that we have in the market, we talk about, general market inefficiencies and failures. And they're pretty much 90+% is all to do with a lack of information. In one area, you talk about costs, transaction costs. You have a lack of access to markets. You have lack of access to storage and so many other issues. You talk about information asymmetry, and this is where there's lack of sufficient data regarding price, but even regarding quality and standardization. And then when we talk about market chaos, we're really going into things like standardization. So in this part, I mean, I'm speaking primarily West Central Africa, but it does cut across quite broadly. There is a lack of standardization when it comes to many of our commodities. Some of the grains are sold by standards, but to a large extent, probably 80% of what's being traded is being traded unstandardized in a very unstructured manner in very informal markets within Ghana, but across the sub-region. So it's really an issue. Where we want to start to talk about benchmarking against international prices, whether it's West Africa or global prices, you need to have a starting base. And here we need to have standards that are applicable across the subcontinent, across the sub-region, and at some point globally. So it would be very difficult to benchmark a price of a maize in Ghana with the price of maize in Europe, if we're not talking standardization. So this is a key challenge. When you start to bring in systems like commodity exchanges and in fact, all the different types of organizations represented on this platform, we're trying to see how we can bring standards to the market so that we have a level playing field when it comes to benchmarking. What a system like a commodity exchange does, for instance, the one we've set up here today, is that we facilitate trade of commodities, but standardized commodities. So we start for the first time in the markets to see the price of different commodities according to the different standards, according to the different grades. This information, storing this information, sharing this information on a very public basis is really the beginning to be able to unlock the differences between, prices worldwide. Having this information at country levels and then exchanging that information across countries is really the next step. And it's what will allow people to make informed decisions when it comes to how they set the prices of their commodities and then the value they can derive from them. So standardization is really key. It's something which we're a little bit behind on, especially regarding certain commodities. We do have some which are extremely well developed, like cocoa. It's a global commodity. In West Africa is producing more than 60% of the world's cocoa. So here you're really talking about standardization and price information at a very high level, but we need to catch up when it comes to basic food security crops. And I think the types of interventions that we're going to be talking about today, that we're going to try to unlock, are really solutions to helping us to, start to get on the right trend and start to fix some of these issues. No one, a farmer, whether it's a smallholder farmer, commercial farmer, cannot derive the value for their crop if they don't even know what it's worth in the first place. So yeah, I think this is it's a good time to be having these discussions. This type of intervention cannot be done by one singular body. We have the interventions that I'm sure AgFlow will be talking about, how we can start to not only get information in individual markets, but how we can link them together so that overall the markets can make better informed decisions. It's critical. I mean, I can't stress that enough. So yeah, these are really critical interventions to bring the markets up to speed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tushi. And we definitely look forward to seeing the exchange play a greater role in helping Ghana catch up with food standardization, as you mentioned. Seeing as AgFlow was mentioned again, and drawing upon the activities in AgFlow's recent project, Nabil, you are working towards creating a database of commodity prices within the West African region. So I'd also like to ask you the same question. How could greater information on the international markets benefit the price listing of new commodities from your perspective?
Yes, thank you, Brian. So we here believe that the issue doesn't lie only in the production of more staple food in Western Africa, which actually have been deployed by all the post-colonialism legacy, but rather in staple food substitutes. I'm here thinking about sorghum, cassava, millet, etc. Each of which could replace actually a widely spread commodities such as maize, rice, wheat, etc. And providing more data on these niche commodities. They are niche, and niche means more fragmented, less information about it, and more reluctance to expand and produce these commodities, would naturally trigger more interest for these commodities. Primary processors would typically be more interested into processing these commodities and processing them in a way that would add value. For example, they would make flour out of sorghum, etc., to replace wheat potentially, and we believe that that's the key. And these commodities are also traded elsewhere. So having an international benchmark for how much the commodities price out elsewhere in a similar environment, that could typically boost the attractiveness of these commodities in Western Africa. So yeah, now imagine a well-documented trade information system referencing all these staple food substitutes with their prices, qualities, their inland flows very transparently. We strongly believe that that would encourage new entrants, such as traders or primary processors, to enter these niche markets, and which would then trigger more dynamism to these underestimated areas. So yeah, we strongly believe that in that regard, staple food would be greatly impacted by more transparency, with thanks to a proper information system.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you, Nabil. And we look forward to the execution of the project. I would also like to ask Thomas the same question, because earlier you mentioned that Talk actually built its own systems to monitor prices. But I'd like to hear your perspective on drawing upon international markets and how this information can benefit price listing of new commodities.
Yeah, so I think as Nabil touched upon before, it's, you know, there are several commodities that which are products which are being produced in Africa. So we typically would think of corn, soybeans, but as we mentioned, millet, sorghum, yam, cassava. These are products which can be used in pharmaceuticals. It can be used in the drinks industry. It can be used in the food industry, not just in domestic, but also internationally. And I think the question is, for example, if I want to process yam for, say, beauty products in Spain, where do you even begin to trade, right? So what do? Do you Google? Do you go to eBay? There's almost no starting point for trying to buy African goods, and that's just raw goods which have not been processed. Talk less of actual processed goods. So I think right off, you know, the bat, the most important thing is creating an environment where all this data is available on information systems, because there is a huge global interest in many of the goods that we're producing. For example, one of the goods that we process is dry cut ginger. We also do hibiscus. Both of those are used for medicinal purposes in South America and in Asia. But typically, these are our own internal systems which are monitoring the prices, monitoring the production, and then we're using that to meet the orders of our valued customers across the world. But there should be greater access to all the wonderful produce that we're producing in sub-Saharan Africa, and nobody knows where to start. So I think it's very, very important that we don't also just focus on world pricing. Okay, let's try and beat America for their soybean price, because in reality, the cost of production is going to be far lower. In Southeast Asia, their production for, say, you know, bananas, processed bananas in the Philippines was going to be cheaper than it is in Ghana. So I'm not saying we shouldn't compete, but we should also highlight what we are good at and what we do produce, which nobody else is producing, which we're still under exporting. I'm sure everybody on the panel here knows just the sheer volume of produce which is spoiled, rotten, which doesn't even, you know, get to feed Africans, let alone use for exports. So highlighting what we produce, building better systems to maintain the quality for domestic consumption and for international exports is vital. And then I think even building on from that, I think we also, you know, need to focus on investing in R&D into food production, because still a primary issue with cashew, with cocoa, is that we're exporting a lot of these goods in the raw form. So there's a lot of value in the process, in the value chain, which is not being kept in Africa. So not only do we need to highlight more of these goods, we also need to produce the final goods for consumption, for domestic markets and for international markets. And all of that can be supported by data. So I think they work hand in hand, but we need to move down the value chain. So not only should we be producing more, we need to highlight more what we're doing, and we also need to develop and produce more finished goods, which can also be sold interregionally and also to other continents across the world.
Wonderful. Thank you, Thomas. I think that's a great point you raised about not necessarily drawing upon those international markets or prices, but contextualizing and building our own knowledge sovereignty. So that's a really interesting point. But for those who just joined, I would like to remind you to include your questions that you have in the chat box. The panelists have shared a lot of information so far. So any question you have, please write them down and note who you would like to address the question to in the chat. In the end, in our Q&A session, panelists will have an opportunity to answer these questions. Now, moving on, in today's context, especially with the inception of AfTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is up and running. Mr. Ziad Hamwi, I know you are and you have played a key role as a member of a technical working group of the National AfTA Coordination Office in Ghana on trade policy and facilitation. And you're also a regional trade advocate in general, as are many of our panelists. But I would like to hear from you on how these information systems providing market prices in the region can boost intra-Africa trade.
Thank you again. And let me first of all agree with what Thomas just said, creating markets and then adding value. And as you know, the AfCFTA holds the potential to accelerate regional integration by providing larger markets for locally originating goods to be exported across the region at a lower cost, which will somehow adjust the competitiveness of these products among themselves in order to shield them somehow or give them an advantage against the products that have been globally being built for such a long time. There are some competitiveness, unfortunately, that Africa cannot compete against. And as you know, the agriculture subsidies is an extremely thorny issue at the World Trade Organization level and on the global scene. Countries in Europe, in the US, and even in Asia subsidize their farmers' productivity. And so productivity just goes over the roof. And then after you do this for so many years, you develop the economies of scale so that the product becomes the most competitive products. But that is on one hand. On the other hand, we cannot continue on the profit maximization and the cost reduction of hyperglobalization. This is simply not sustainable because the more we do it, the more dependent we become on consumption, and the more dependent on consumption we become, the poorer we will become. And keep in mind that Africa is not only a very populous continent, but it's also a young and quickly growing continent. And so this means that millions and millions of people are added into the African population that needs jobs, that needs foods, that need energy, and that needs proper nutrition and proper skills. So it is time that we start to look inward about how to use the local value chains to develop them, to add value to them, to the benefit of the continent and its local stakeholders. Now, that being said, I believe that information systems can help us to create these market linkages. Not that they are not there and we are starting from scratch. I'm not the type who will advocate reinventing the wheel. All I'm saying is that we have so many systems that are just niche systems within their local or national or regional level. Let's try to find a way to consolidate these information into larger reaching systems where all of the parties who add or who own part of this information will end up in a better position. So if I own so much information and I pull it into a dashboard and someone else owns so much information and pulls it into that dashboard, then we both end up with the totality, access to the totality of that information. And we end up with a synergy. We both co-own that. So let us look at co-creating systems, at co-owning systems. Now, I know that AgFlow hasn't discussed the pricing mechanism or at least the financial aspects of such a system. But of course, the availability of this information comes at a premium. And so this premium will have to be subsidized somehow. Now, how to divide this kind of value for the use either by private sector players or by advocates as ourselves who can profit from enhanced market information, or from governments who will benefit from better policies. Now, there are several initiatives across the continent. For example, the regional food balance sheet, which AGRA has pioneered in Central and Southern Africa, which will be starting with a pilot phase of up to 11 countries. Now, these systems actually are trying to create dashboards that are co-owned by the regional economic communities and the main stakeholders in this region. And by co-owning, I'm talking about both the operational aspects and second, the financial aspects. So if you own part of something, then you have to support it somehow, either in person or financially or somehow. So let us look at the ways where we can come up with creative financing or with creative collaborations on consolidating the information systems that are out there, and to make sure that the benefits not only to the owners of this data, but also to the normal economic operators who are looking at boosting their productivity and becoming more competitive in order to trade their goods better across borders and into markets where these products are received. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ziad. I think a very important takeaways on the ownership of information, collaboration for the consolidation of information, and in order to boost our trade systems, and very relevant examples that you provided as well. Tucci, I would also love to hear from you. As you've highlighted, one of the main services GCX provides is that of information dissemination and that of information on the prices of commodities. How could information systems providing market prices such as that on the exchange play a role in boosting intra-Africa trade?
Transparency. I think everyone has touched upon it already. If we don't know what exists in a given market, and it's not just pricing, actually, it's volumes, supply, demand, we cannot do anything without information. Today, it's already difficult trying to trade within one country when you're not really sure the exact numbers that are in demand, especially by standards, by quality, let alone when you're trying to trade across the globe. There are some commodities, as Thomas mentioned, that are produced in multiple geographies. And there, pricing becomes, maybe a competitive advantage, but there are other commodities that are produced only in a given country or in a few countries. And so having this information, having access to this information will inform buyers. And this is a multitude of buyers. Some people are looking for commodities for various types of products. Some look for substitutes. So you have beverage companies that are used to producing their products with a certain commodity, but once that's out of stock, they start to look for substitutes. So this information being available on a global scale will immediately play a big role in boosting, intra-Africa trade. But if the information is not there to be found, or is difficult to find, you are, basically limiting the potential that can be traded within countries. I don't, we've talked about things like, again, I'll repeat, Thomas has talked about things like cost of production. There are so many elements that come into play, but the more detailed information that is available for value chain actors, for market actors, the more informed decisions and the more informed choices they can make. So I think it kind of goes without saying, that information is key. I don't know which industry, we don't use information or knowledge as the key driving force. When it comes to agriculture, if we go, backstream and we look at planned volumes as well, this is going to be something that we need to speak more and more about, because there are going to be changes.
No, that's a great insight, especially on transparency, not just on prices, but also for volumes and quality. Thank you, Tucci. Nabil, I would like to hear your perspective as ACFLO is currently playing a key role through its project in boosting intra-Africa trade through market price provision. Nabil, it would be great to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I think at first it's worth reminding that the AFCFTA is trying to achieve in such a fragmented landscape of economies is not an easy job. It's actually very big. And they have themselves intricately entwined that concept with trade integrity, what they define as international trade transactions that are legitimate, transparent, and properly priced. And that's exactly aligned with ACFLO's values and what we are trying to achieve. So now to answer your question, the underlying objective of the free trade area, which is the harmonization of regulation, means that new ecosystem model and practices will arise. And that will lead to new challenges, especially data challenges, more cross-border transactions and more opportunities to do business will lead to a lot more data and information to process and take account of. And not only market prices, but also inland flows, regulation changes, weather information, etc. And for example, it will now become key to understand how neighboring nations are pricing commodities and benchmark widely before executing any transaction. That would be a practice to adopt. More commodities movements between countries, inland or on sea, leads to new freight rates markets. So there will be new freight rates markets that will be created and new dynamics. Take, for example, Chad. It has several million inhabitants and which is fully dependent on just a few routes to get supplied in food. Typically, they will be able to diversify their food supply, and I'm not saying eradicate hunger in their population, but reduce it, mitigate it. And if the players in Chad have the right information systems, that will be way easier for them to do. One can see that this is true rushing into Africa to seize these kind of opportunities. And there are probably many new routes that are being built. All that will trigger an immense amount of new data around freights, which is actually one of the most opaque topic within the ag industry. And will raise very, very important data aggregation and distribution challenges for all commodities movers across the whole value chain and from all sizes. Finally, I would say that more movement between these countries also will increase the reliance on routes, construction of new roads in remote regions, etc. And often we know it well in these regions, routes are impacted by weather events, and even more now with global warming. So it will raise even more the importance to anticipate and report these events in real time in the market in order to tackle and address the challenges they would trigger. So yes, that says it all, I think. Such a new free trade environment will need a robust trade information system to back it. And otherwise, it will be very difficult to document, track, and share the data effectively. And we as ACFLO strongly believe that organizations like, for example, Borderless Alliance, JCX, who are very close to actually the field challenges, will be key in capturing and streamlining all that new data flow. And that shows how much of a joint effort the establishment of a properly integrated system will be needed to make sense. And that should inevitably be backed by a coalition. Thank you.
Brianne, can I just pick up a point that Nabil just made? Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
You know, he was talking about, you know, the increase in demand across markets leading to things like, you know, simple things like improving of infrastructure, fixing of roads and so on. If you look at some of the challenges we have, especially in the sub-region today, when it comes to costs, we experience extremely high transaction costs, and it's because of things like this: poor roads, poor logistics, poor infrastructure. And if we want to be seen as truly competitive on the global scale, at some point costs will have to start to come down. Initially, the costs will increase as you're going to be spending a lot in terms of capital building, infrastructure building, but ultimately you're improving efficiencies in the market, you start to bring transaction costs down, and African countries can start to become truly competitive. These inefficiencies do not only have a negative impact on cost, but also on time and speed to market. So I think we can't stress on how something as simple as data, as information, can have such a ripple effect when it comes to, you know, logistics, infrastructure, and competitive markets. So yeah.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Tucci. I think it's fair to say that we can all agree that transparency of data is key for boosting intra-Africa trade, especially having a knock-on effect on other aspects of the value chain, whether it's logistics, whether it's in quality and other aspects. I'd like to actually give it back to you, Tucci. This is a very relevant topic that we're going to discuss, that of commodity exchanges and their role. And as we know, initiatives led by commodity exchanges in Africa, they can definitely be saluted. Many like GCX promotes trade with technology as the backbone of its operations. And as a key leader of one of Africa's commodity exchanges, Tucci, how can market data increase trades on the exchanges in the regions?
Yeah, I mean, you know, exchanges are extremely beneficial at country level. So I think we talked about some of the interventions that it stands to bring to the market, some of the problems it seeks to solve, things like providing, you know, access to markets, access to data, access to storage. And if you can do that efficiently in one market, then you can start to look at how you can expand your markets beyond that. I think in the context of this conversation, what is so important is to see how exchanges in different African countries can connect with one another to make structured trading across the region even more effective. So yes, starting in one country where we can start to introduce the idea of standardization and bringing all those benefits to bear is a really good starting point. Having the African Continental Free Trade Secretariat, you know, really now, you know, solidly in operations, and lucky for us also here in Ghana, how we can link up with such institutions and encourage other African countries to establish commodity exchanges so that we can link systems. This is a very easy way to start to link buyers, members across continents. At the Ghana Commodity Exchange, we've already started engaging in, very positive discussions with AFEX, which is a commodity exchange based in Abuja. How can we link our systems so that we can benefit from, cross-border, but in a structured way, cross-country trading, especially for commodities that exist here that they do not have in Nigeria and vice versa. I think the quicker we can start to accelerate this, the more smooth and efficient the process of commodity trading will be across the continent. So I say that we're really all responsible if we want to see this happen. It's only technology. Technology is going to bring the speed. Technology is going to bring the efficiencies. And now there are so many types, different types of platforms and technologies, blockchain that, can facilitate these linkages. So it's an important time for us to have these conversations. We're doing that first, within Africa, but, these are scalable. So we can start to become, as an African continent, we can start to become competitive and trade with, across the globe, basically. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Tucci. I think, hello, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jude. I think it's a very important point you raised about creating linkages between various exchanges. In this globalized world, they can't exist in silos, and especially drawing upon the use of technology to link these exchanges for commodity trades, to look at other countries for price references of commodities. I think it's very, very key. So thank you, very important point. I'd like to also hand over to Thomas and get his view on this. Have you had any interaction with exchanges, and what is your take on this topic? How could market data increase trades on exchanges in the region?
Yeah, it's a very important subject. I think ultimately more data will lead to more trust. More trust will lead to more physical deliveries. If we have more physical deliveries, that will lead to more investment, and more investment will mean bigger crops. So this is why it's key to have the data to drive it, to kick off this whole program, because as we all know, we've barely scratched the surface when it comes to the amount of produce that we're producing on the arable land in sub-Saharan Africa. It's very pale in comparison to other regions across the world, and every strong economy of big nations is built on agriculture. So we must get more investment into the system, and that means being a bigger breadbasket. And so having more data, having more eyes on us, I think is something that is very important. South Africa has done it extremely well, and that's, you know, almost on par with some other international markets. So I think in West and East Africa, it's definitely something that we need to try and do more. And for us as for traders, look, we need physical deliveries, right? There's one thing to have the prices. There's another thing to actually be able to conclude a transaction. And this is some of the issues that we've had in the past with some exchanges, that the prices may not be accurate. They might be 2-3 weeks old, and the market price is moving multiple times on a daily basis, not just in the global markets, but also in the domestic markets. So if we can have more data, I think it will lead to more trust. And if the farmers and aggregators feel that the exchanges work for them and it gives more eyes, then I think it will overall benefit the entire system. And ultimately, what we want is more crops being planted, more people going into farming, more people getting back into the value chain in agriculture to boost the numbers across the region.
Yeah, thank you for your perspective, Thomas. I'd like to throw it over to Nabil, who's currently working with an exchange, GCX. So I'm sure you definitely agree that exchanges play an important role in promoting market data.
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, commodities exchanges are key ecosystems for the transition to a more transparent and efficient org markets in general. And the efforts to build them from scratch, especially in fragmented and opaque environments like Western Africa, must be tremendous. So I would like to applaud and support GCX endeavor. Thank you for that, because we wouldn't be able to do it without partners like you. Now, commodities exchange activities come with several data challenges. First, the centralization of transaction will lead to vast amounts of fragmented raw data flows. So although that raw data is highly valuable, it must be first collected, compiled, and redistributed efficiently and effectively in order for it to gain real value. Often that raw data is not enough. It has to be put together into insights in order to make sense for small side players such as producers, etc., who are not as sophisticated as international trading houses. And finally, I would say that exchanges are small-scale free trade ecosystems, and they will be, as Tucci said, interconnected with neighboring countries and economies, raising the importance of even more integrated transparency between these various markets in order to trade efficiently. So yes, we are, as AgFlow, also a community of members, the same way as exchanges, who rely on each other in order to be more effective, more productive, and create more benefits for everyone. And integrating all these market players together, exchanges, alliances, trade information system like us, would not only encourage regional trades, but inevitably increase them as a result. So yeah, we strongly believe that an exchange like G6, providing access to actionable intelligence to their members, not only with local insights, but cross-border insights, will open windows to several international markets, be it in the continent of Africa, or even outside, for potentially exporting. And that will be very favorable for better food systems, interconnectivity, and finally to reach our end goal, which is more resilient food systems. However, that effort, again, I cannot repeat it enough, has to be collaborative, because the players are actually the product in such a model, as they feed the whole system. And we need to work hand in hand with all alliances, all exchanges, in order to be fully integrated. Otherwise, this is not going to work. And that also ties back to what Ziad said before. Because this is collaborative, at some point, it will need to be financed and subsidized by some means. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nabil.
Can I please make a quick intervention?
I was actually just going to turn to you, Ziad. Go ahead.
I will also take that one later, but I need to say this. It's important that we avoid falling into the trap that a lot of others are trying to do now. Too much effort is being focused on the production and consumption currently. There are many initiatives across the world which are trying to tackle the problems with food production systems by tackling production and consumption while ignoring the rest of the chain. So let us assume that you manage to increase your competitiveness, manage to reduce your costs, and you manage to find your markets. But then comes the time, first of all, moving the goods from one point to the other. And then it has to do with dealing with the many challenges of the trade barriers that will prevent you from moving these goods from the point of production to the point of consumption. And that is what we actually have to tackle, right? The trade barriers that prevent this kind of integration of various commodity exchanges across the continent. Because at the moment, even if we're talking with with one commodity exchange, and I'm going to tell you something, I dream of a situation, hopefully very soon in time, where Ghana Commodity Exchange will become the hub for bringing in all kinds of commodities and value chains from all across West Africa into the warehouses in Ghana, so that the value will be added into Ghana, and then it will be produced, it will be sold out into the rest of West Africa and the rest of the world as a locally produced product. But the fact is that we still have a problem across our borders in moving goods in and out. And so we have to look at and examine very cautiously the problems that will prevent this integration from reaching its full potential. Now over to you.
Great. Now, thank you, Mr. Hamoui. I think I'm very glad you raised the point on the movement of goods, and you responded to the logistics question, because I believe every panelist has mentioned logistics as a key hindrance to the movement of goods. And so I'm very glad to hear your perspective on that. I think on the next point, I would like to refer to Thomas on this. You mentioned earlier investment into Africa information systems, and with your knowledge on value chain financing, how do you think transparent data facilitates value chain financing in Africa and helps to reduce the opacity in the market?
Yeah, I think one of the bigger things about the exchanges, which we haven't talked about yet, is hedging and hedging risk. I think one of the big issues for investors, either whether it be the primary investor being the farmer, or if it's secondary coming from a trade fund or coming from a bank, there's plenty of capital in the world which is ready to be invested, but there's no information to secure the investment. And so having these systems in place, which allows, it could be a hedge fund sitting in Singapore or in New York who want to invest in primary farming, they now can, through these exchanges, can see actually this is the local production, these are the historical prices, we can hedge forward our positions. And now something which is which seemingly, like most investments in Africa, seem to be quite risky, you can now de-risk these transactions and mitigate them. And these systems provide a very important tool to do that. And so as a trader, as a business person investing, you have to mitigate risk. And that's all we're doing, right? Our whole business is to mitigate risk and take the risk where necessary. But ultimately, we want to reduce them. And so having these systems, investing in them, having better exchanges, having bigger flows, more data, will just allow us to be a little bit more sophisticated in managing our positions. That's for us as Talk Commodities, but also for the farmers as well, which is, if you look historically, how the CBOT, Chicago Board of Trade, was formed. It's to manage positions of farmers, right? So they can plan forward what they're going to do, not just this season, but in the coming seasons. And that is essentially the building blocks for the modern day commodity exchanges and markets, and also to expand the industry. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We just need to, make a couple of adjustments to make it work for our local markets.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. A very interesting perspective there. I'd also like to hear from Nabil again. In your past, you've worked as a venture capital investor, and I'd like to hear your perspective on value chain financing and how African information systems, how investments into information systems could help that.
Yes, Brian, thank you. So as said at the start of the panel, improving trading market transparency and efficiency is a necessary step that will modernize the African economy, but it's not an end in itself. Once achieved, the underlying local production will be better documented, and foreign and local finance provider will typically be more inclined to invest in different projects across the value chain as a result. And that will be the trigger to widely spread agricultural modernization, which is the key to establish resilient food systems. And at AgFlow, we are, as I said at the beginning, on a mission to lead humanity's transition to a transparent and efficient global food supply chain. And our next step is to go beyond trading markets and provide transparency further across the value chain. And we're not talking only about technical improvements here, but more importantly, about social improvements. So having live data and information on what's happening underground across the chain, reported in a fully integrated system, interconnected with each segment, with a comprehensive qualification process of each source within the segment, would not only boost production profitability with better KPIs tracking, that's an implied benefit, but also significantly reduce bad and sustainable practices such as women violence, child or forced labor, and unfair pay. And such a value chain information system may be difficult to build, actually, which would maybe restrain some investors to come in. But actually, if we can isolate the data in a closed ecosystem, where the data in and output would be limited by the boundaries of that ecosystem, then that would become feasible. And that would supply information within that ecosystem and make it transparent. And then once tested, could be replicated elsewhere and elsewhere and elsewhere. And at some point, such transparent ecosystem would be a facilitator especially for foreign investments. And I'm talking here not only investment from big institutions, but direct, more private investment. So eventually all that will lead to local, measurable, and replicable economic growth in various regions in Africa, increasing production capacity and new foreign and local investments. Again, and also locally, there are several finance providers within Africa that are just looking for more transparency in order to deploy more capital throughout the continent. But again, the first step is transparency in trading markets, and then we'll move to the value chain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nabil. It seems that we have a running theme of transparency as important for promoting intra-Africa trade through information systems. I'd also like to ask Ziad the same question. As a business leader, how do you think transparent data facilitates value chain financing in Africa?
Well, first of all, it would provide the visibility to make informed decisions with regard to where to guide information flows. And I agree with what Thomas was saying earlier, that there is a lack of information and a perceived high risk for projects in Africa. There is money for financing, but Africa is simply perceived traditionally, stereotypically as risky. And one of the reasons why this perception is there is because there is no real opportunity to create these platforms where you bring the projects, the risk assessors, on site to examine where the projects are. And probably the responsibility is shared here because many investors or many project owners in Africa feel that they need to cover their projects in order to protect them from being stolen. And that might have to do with something about a culture of a lack of intellectual property respect. So people are very unwilling to part with their pet projects. Sometimes many of these projects are worth investigating and following and pursuing. If you have the type of data and information that reveals and pinpoints the areas where a particular project is available, or where the information shows that there are markets between point A and point B across Africa, then you can work on a bankable project. You bring in the developers, the risk assessors, you come up with, you draft a proposal, you work on fine-tuning the details, you bring in the money, you execute, and then you are done. And it's pretty much simple and standard. It's just the perception of risk. And in order to remove this false perception of risk, there needs to be more. The data will help us identify the project. However, there will still be the need to create these platforms which will bring in the investors and the projects together in order to make sure that we can have this kind of increased foreign direct investment flows. And sometimes it would not be foreign in the sense of outside of Africa. There are many African originating investment and capital financing, which are looking for projects that are bankable across Africa, but they can't see it. And so the more we can have access to the information that will reveal where these projects are, the more highly likely we are to observe an increased flow of finance onto the continent.
Great. Thank you, Ziad. I think some very important notes on risk mitigation and some practical business advice that I'm sure many can draw upon. I am going to ask the final question, which I'll throw to all panelists. But before we do that, just a reminder that our Q&A session is coming up shortly. So if you have any questions, write them in the chat box and address them to whoever you want to ask the question to by writing their name. We have a few already, but we look forward to discussing what the panelists have shared much further, and we hope it will be an interesting discussion. But before we get there, I think at this point we can all agree that connecting each actor across the value chain with data definitely helps to facilitate the offset of commodities, especially by providing essential tracking and sustainability services. I would like to hear all your thoughts on this, and I would love to start with Tucci. So what are your final words on the ability for data to connect actors across value chains for sustainability in the future?
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll just just say a point on the value chain financing, and then I'll close up. And I'd like to maybe share a very practical example of how one product on the commodity exchange is helping to open that up. So we have a product called warehouse receipt financing. Here, a smallholder farmer can take their warehouse receipt to a bank and get a loan. Essentially, has or her, let's say a bag of 10 bags of maize, he takes it to a GCX warehouse and he gets issued an electronic warehouse receipt. This warehouse receipt then becomes a security, and they can take this to a bank and get a loan based on the commodities they've stored in the warehouse. The bank agrees to provide the farmer the loan because GCX has taken custody of the commodities and is guaranteeing that these commodities are going to be safely stored and sold on. The financing will go directly to the bank. So once the commodities are sold, it goes through the bank back to the farmer. So this system of information data, first of all, the bank knows exactly how much the farmer has stored with the commodity exchange. So the volume, the grade, and then they have access to information. So daily, we actually send price information to not only to the farmers and all the members of the exchange ecosystem, the banks as well. So they receive real-time information on, actual traded commodities on a daily basis. All of this is increasing their confidence in order to guarantee, loans and start to provide financing. So again, it's linked to the systems and the reliability of data. This is instilling trust in the system, and it's allowing banks to open up, to financing products which hitherto were non-existent on the market. For a farmer, especially a smallholder farmer, to go and get a loan from a bank, it was almost impossible because you'd need a house or a car or some other type of collateral. Now, with a warehouse receipt alone, from a commodity exchange, because of all the different, guarantees, or let's say the risk mitigators that the exchange puts in place. And this is largely centered around the data being provided, on a daily basis to these financial institutions, is opening up confidence. And it's things like this that starts to open up the market. When we talk about sustainability, I think we've all mentioned it in one way, shape, or form. It starts with information. Information breeds trust. So the more frequent we're able to provide, this information across markets, across platforms, and then the market starts to see that there's reliability when it comes to this information. It's information that you can bank on. It increases trust, and this is how the systems are going to start working together and provide that sustainable framework for us to continue. So again, they're all connected. I mean, building efficiencies start from having not only access to information, but the right information at the right time, because timing is also critical to making some of these decisions happen. Over from me.
Brian, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. I was just saying thank you to Tucci, and thank you for highlighting an innovative product that commodity exchanges can provide. And thank you for your final note. I would also like to draw upon Nabil to share his final words on the ability for data to connect others across the value chain for sustainability in the future.
Yes, thank you, Brian. So yes, as said before, having all this transparency across, first in trading markets, and in a second stage in across the value chain, is the key to what comes next. And what comes next is agricultural modernization, and that will trigger. But agricultural modernization needs way more investment. So in order to trigger this investment, we need that transparency to be widely spread across the continent. And we have now, with the free trade agreement and all these countries participating to the agreement, the right momentum to deploy such effort. And even more, let's say, not because, but thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic and all the imports consequences, an additional momentum to get up to speed toward that goal, as because of all the challenges that Africa is facing right now. So that's my final word. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nabil. Thank you for those final thoughts. Thomas, final words on the ability for data to connect actors across the value chain for sustainability in the future.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion so far, and this is ultimately where this talk has to go. We know data is key. We want more data. It will help grow the business across all the value chains, and we're a big believer in pushing for that. I think one thing which we've not mentioned so far is that we've got the aggregators, we've got the exchanges, we've got the farmers, but we also need governments. So I think, particularly with the free trade agreement that we've talked about, none of this can work or have the scale that it needs. It needs to make it globally competitive if we don't have coordination between the governments. So if we have a free trade agreement, but we don't have harmonization on taxes and on duties, then it just falls down. It doesn't work. So we can't have one set of laws, taxes, duties, levies in Nigeria, for example, and something different with a border country like Niger, Cameroon, Ghana. If we don't have the harmonization across the region, then these policies won't be as effective. And ultimately, we need to develop our own domestic market, so which will also boost the economy for the farmers, all the actors in the value chain, as we've discussed. Then we've got the international markets, but we need to develop the local markets. So yes, information systems are a great tool for investors, they're a great tool for farmers, they're a great tool for traders, but it's also a great tool for governments, so they can see the flows, they can start to get a real size of the volumes and the potential of the markets, but they can also use it to track movements across borders, to have a real understanding of the potential and where there's been slippages, or maybe where improvement or investment can be made to help the region as a whole, because ultimately we know the power of becoming a bloc and really trading and operating as a bloc rather than individual countries. So I think if we use IT and information system to support governments and to have them align as much as we in the private sector aligned, I think overall that will boost the success for the development of agriculture in Africa.
Thank you, Thomas. And definitely a very important factor to note, that without coordination with government and harmonization of policies between different countries, after AFCFTA policies, as well as the integration of information systems within the region, will be unsuccessful. And this will not be achieved. So thank you for that. And last but not least, Ziad, it would be great to hear your perspective. What role do you see data playing in this function? In connecting actors across the value chain for sustainability in the future?
Well, let me just wrap up by saying that in today's knowledge-driven world, data is the new gold. And let me also say that good information will help you to make good decisions, whether you're a trader, whether you're a government, whether you're an economic operator. Let us look at how to collaborate all together to create more reliable, more relevant, and more up-to-date information that can be used in order to restart and build back better African agriculture. The current system, and I will never get tired of saying this during the AGRF, the current global food system is broken and is unsustainable. It is time to get to fix that. We have tools to fix it, and technology has a big role to play in ensuring that we can improve, enhance, and transform African agriculture. Information has a big role to play. Let us all unite and leverage our resources and our networks in order to create a more inclusive and a more sustainable African agriculture to the benefit of all its stakeholders. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ziad. I think you said a very, very important phrase just now. Just to sum it all up, you mentioned that good information will help you to make good decisions, whether you're a government, a trader, or another actor. So that's a great way to sum it up. Hello, can everyone hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think my connection was unstable for a second. So we've now reached the point within this session where we draw upon some questions from our eager listeners, and we'll direct these to the panelists. We have a few questions that have been put in the chat box so far, so I'm just going to read some of them. Please don't forget to write your questions down and then ask and then direct them to one of the speakers or all, as some of you have done already. So the first question, to talk commodities, and this is referring to the EU standardized product tracking. The question is, how would effective tracking of commodities affect the commodity trading market?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. I think one of the great things with having the information systems is obviously bringing traceability to the flows in and out of Africa. And I'm sure many of you may be aware, some may be unaware, that a lot of what we're producing in sub-Saharan Africa is either organic or non-GMO. And there are premiums, particularly in Asia and in Europe, for non-GMO organic, because this is the way the human consumption is going in the developed world. And we're producing a lot of this in Africa, much more than many other regions in the world who have been over-reliant on genetically modified seeds and over-fertilizing their soils. So we have extremely fertile soil. We produce some of the best crops in the world, but we don't have the systems to show the traceability all the way back to the farm. So by having these systems implemented, it will help for fair trade, for sustainable, traceable, which is, if you're based in the UK or in Europe, you know that supermarkets are trending in that direction. People are more thoughtful now. They're more active and engaged in veganism, in understanding their carbon footprint, understanding where their food is coming from. So if we're able to showcase this through the systems, through information systems, then we'd actually not only will be able to boost trade, but we'll also be able to attract a higher premium. So, and that's the good thing, that maybe we're producing something which there might not be a domestic market, or it might be underpriced in a domestic market, but on an international market, there's a premium. And without having the systems and without having the markets and exchanges, nobody would know. So you have goods which are maybe rotting or are being sold under the market, and that money could be going to the farmer to support more planting to go again for the next season. So this is why having more data will support this, and it will directly have an impact in the pocket of the farmers.
Great, thank you, Thomas. I think you've definitely adequately answered the question. A second question directed to Ziad. How do you see data reducing some of the trade barriers?
Wow, this question, we can keep discussing it until the end of AGRF, but I have to summarize it in a minute, I guess. Now, let's see. Well, first of all, let me answer this in two sections. The first one is to talk about trade barriers, because there isn't just trade barriers, there are types of trade barriers. There are technical trade barriers, and then there are non-tariff barriers, and each of them is different and is qualified differently. And I'm not here to give a lecture. It's just to show that when we're talking about trade barriers, there are so many of them. Some of the barriers are intentionally put in order to disrupt trade flows because countries are afraid and are trying to protect their domestic markets. Some barriers are genuinely there because there is a lack of cohesive harmonization of documentation and procedures, whether sanitary and phytosanitary procedures, or whether quality standards, or whether any other things. So the cross-border trade becomes a barrier, and knowledge. Data provides the knowledge to know these in advance, for example, and preempt them. Today, we're just talking about hundreds and hundreds of trucks that are piling up at the border between Togo and Benin, for example, unable to cross into Nigeria. And that is not a technical barrier. That is just something that is cooked by a particular country just to create some kind of an impediment to prevent trucks from moving freely across the region. That is a trade barrier. But if you know about that trade barrier, no matter how much data you have inside there, you would still have to deal with it at the appropriate level. So knowing about the data will provide the information that will allow you to make a decision in a particular area, and also to attempt to identify the cost of your production or your transportation or the value of time at delays. Lots of people underestimate the value of time, the cost element of time. Can you put a dollar tag for the cost of an additional day waiting at the various checkpoints across West Africa, for example? Now, we used to, if you recall, Borderless Alliance used to disseminate quarterly road governance maps, which used to monitor the number of checkpoints, the amounts of delays at each of these checkpoints on average, and the average illicit fees that were paid along these checkpoints along the corridors in West Africa, with funding coming from USAID through their regional West Africa Trade Hub project. So we used to use these maps in order to monitor and track the numbers of these barriers, and then to present these barriers to the authorities in the respective countries. Now, the effect of these data-driven advocacy varies from country to country. In 2011, when we went to the Minister of Security of Togo, they took a decision to completely abolish all kinds of checkpoints throughout Togo. In Ghana, it's not the same thing, because police have a particular way of looking at security issues and then discussing whether the security checkpoints are doing the right thing or not, and that is leading to it. So all I want to say is that the data will provide you with the opportunity to know in advance how much competitive you will be, and also what are the kind of hurdles you will have to avoid when you are planning your logistic chain and your economics in businesses. It might be that a knowledge of a particular set of information will make you reconsider some of your economic activity and to change your strategies in a way that matches that. And that is unfortunately one of the true hurdles for the past 2 years, when, for example, Nigeria closed its borders for trade or security concerns. And so it was only lifted in December of 2020, irrespective of what the data says. So there is an underlying governance reality that needs to be tackled by rethinking public-private partnership in policy making in order to generate the momentum that will remove some of these barriers. And one of the ways to do that one is by using evidence-based advocacy and use of data. And then the second one is to use the enhanced access to the information to determine our competitiveness and then to see how we can proceed on the way forward. Now, one favorite thing, it's a bit of a local thing, but it's also applicable to many other countries. One of the universal standards in measuring the competitiveness of your trade is something called the time release study. And that is something that in Ghana we are yet to start to conduct. And that will be an extensive snapshot of how much it actually costs to do trade in and out and across of Ghana. We had this opportunity a few years ago. We missed that opportunity. It is still my hope that with the current administration, we might push that particular passage to draw a snapshot of how much it actually costs to do trade through Ghana and to conduct a time release study in order to find out exactly with data how much it costs to do trade across the country. I hope it's not too, it's a big discussion. I mean, trade barriers are just there to stay, but we need to tackle it jointly.
No, thank you, Zia. Definitely a huge topic, but you definitely addressed it well. The next question is not addressed to anyone in particular, but I would like to address it to Tucci, as this is highly relevant to commodity exchanges. So the question is, how can we make data available at the level of the smallholder farmer in Africa so that they can participate better in the commodity trading markets?
Thank you. I'm really glad, to get that question, because if we want to democratize data, we absolutely have to make it available to smallholder farmers. I mean, in the sub-region, about 90% of all that is produced is coming from smallholder farmers. So if they're left out of the discussion and they're left out of the decision making, then we're not doing our job. I think what's good here is that there are so many different organizations looking to improve, the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, from commodity exchanges to governments to different development partners. What would be good is for these different organizations to really come together so that we can harmonize resources, because everyone's essentially trying to do the same thing. In the end, everyone's going to do piecemeal instead of coming together and making a far bigger impact. Today, depending on which country you're looking at within just Western Central Africa alone, you have a mobile phone penetration of between 60 and 90+%. Almost everyone has a mobile phone, even if it's not a smartphone, a basic phone, using a kind of, basic USSD allows you to have access to basic information like pricing. And so there's really no excuse why we cannot make this data available direct to smallholder farmers. If you look at the number of farmer-based organizations, cooperatives, it's easy to start to get information, who they are, where they are, access to their phone numbers. I mean, the commodity exchange alone, we're currently distributing to, I think, almost 30,000 farmers, but those are the ones we have, directly on our database. They get this information daily, and then we're able to access more than 200 or 300,000 through the farmer-based organizations. Imagine if this effort was to be, grouped with other organizations. We can make this information available relatively cheaply. So I think in terms of priorities in projects, if we want to say that we're really increasing or improving livelihoods and increasing incomes, giving access to the information that matters is something that we should all prioritize. We can bring this information direct to their fingertips. Other methods that are being used across markets are simple information boards, what we call tickers, that are being made available in open market centers, large farming communities, so that people who directly on the field can have access to this information and to share it. So it's possible. It's relatively easy. It will need group efforts to collect the data, but you've got governments, ministries of food and agriculture, like I said, development partners, and all sorts of institutions that can pull together their data and resources to make that happen. So I'd say, rather than looking at this same policy initiatives year after year, it's not just about subsidizing, inputs and things like that. You also can look at subsidizing costs when it comes to data provision, so that this data can become, freely available for the benefit of the entire market.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tucci. Some important insights on democratizing data for smallholder farmers so that they also gain access. I think we are running out of time, but I have one last question to address to Nabil. And very, very quickly, if you can share, there's a question that's directed to you. How would having all actors of the value chain connected through a closed ecosystem lead to more investment? Very, very quickly.
Thank you, Brian. So first, I would like to clarify why a closed ecosystem. So we thought that it is by default easier to build a robust proof of concept in a closed ecosystem rather than being in a too big environment where the scope of the data processing and distribution will be too broad, actually, at the risk to be not actionable or completely irrelevant. So we believe that a fully documented ecosystem where each segment that is actually generating data, and I believe I'm talking about all the segments here, and where the data will be collected, compiled, and made consultable by the value chain participants, will benefit them first, and finally will bring them more efficiency within their own systems and daily activities. Once set up, we believe that knowing that where the commodity is on the ground, how much is stocked at the warehouse, etc., how the workers are being employed and paid, how much input, how much output will bring more comfort for investment providers, assuming the model is replicated in various ecosystems. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Well answered, and thank you. I think this brings us to the close of the session. I would like to say a huge thank you to all our speakers. I believe that from all of you, we've taken away some important insights on the role of information systems in documenting commodity trade, as well as monitoring local markets and boosting intra-Africa trade. We've also talked about the important role of enabling factors such as logistics and government regulations, as well as the important role of commodity exchanges in creating linkages across the continent to make data more accessible and reliable within the continent. I believe each panelist within their own spheres are playing key roles in promoting information systems for trade, whether through AgFlow's market data platform or GCX's e-trade and market information dissemination function. We definitely look forward to seeing more success from all of you and hearing from all of you. So thank you very, very much. Thank you to AGRF for providing the platform. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you to the session organizers as well. And we hope to keep the discussions going. I hope you enjoy the remainder of the AGRF. A huge thank you again to the speakers. I'm going to say goodbye in a second, but it'll be good to hear an audible goodbye from you. And I hope you have a wonderful day and rest of the week. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.